Hi there, good evening. Welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, find us at JimBohannonShow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. Well, we have another contest that is coming up. And, of course, memories of the Iowa caucus debacle is still on top of many minds. Concerns are mounting about Nevada's effort, which takes place on Saturday. Sort of, with some early voting, which will explain how you can early vote in a caucus. Volunteers there are being asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, which will keep them from talking to the media. The Democratic National Committee says that's standard, but one site who foresees issues refused to do so, and Diane Gallagher has that story.
It looks like Nevada's first ever early voting in a caucus is paying off with huge numbers. But will it make getting results more complicated? The Nevada Democratic Party says nearly 75,000 participated in the first ever early caucusing, nearly the total number of voters in the 2016 caucus, when roughly 84,000 people participated on caucus day. In 2008, 118,000 Nevadans caucused in the Democratic race. And while the party celebrated the high turnout, it adds to the uncertainty of whether Nevada is ready for Saturday, or if it will be a repeat of the Iowa fiasco, where final results are still pending.
Our goal is to have a successful caucus, and we provide multiple sets of eyes and ears and wisdom and observations and lessons learned from Iowa so that we can be successful here in Nevada.
Volunteer Seth Morrison raised a red flag early in the training process. Now he's more optimistic, saying things are getting better, but worried about lingering issues.
One is we still don't know any details of the back office, of how all the early votes were tabulated, how this tool works. Second of all, there's a massive shortage of volunteers.
The Democrats are scrambling to train caucus volunteers, having added 55 additional training sessions. Volunteers can now also try out the much-talked-about caucus calculator, which Morrison says is user-friendly.
The tool is very well designed. It's very intuitive.
But he does see potential problems for people who aren't familiar with iPads.
Somebody who has not used that kind of technology would find it challenging.
The calculator will have preloaded early vote information, which will be combined with the choices of the people there on Saturday to determine the winners and losers through 2 rounds of eliminations. The backup, if the calculator doesn't work and those early vote totals aren't available, is tedious, a likely lengthy process of manually searching a paper list of early voters' ranked choices. Still, the chair of the Democratic National Committee says he believes everything will be smooth sailing come Saturday.
I am very confident that we have thought of every contingency.
And Seth Morrison says that the Democratic Party tried to offer him a lesser position that does not require a non-disclosure agreement. He refused and will sit out working this particular caucus. Let's talk a bit about this latest exercise in American democracy. Let's see how arcane we can make it with James Herson, New York Times best-selling author, a media analyst, and law professor who joins us this evening. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
It's always great to be with you, Jim. How are you?
I'm well. I'm a little confused here. Okay, you got caucuses and you've got primaries, and a primary and a caucus are two different things, and yet the Democratic National Committee seems bound and determined to impose certain primary-like rules on caucuses. Now, caucus night, we spoke on the air with Professor Jeff Stein in Iowa, who is one of the experts on that, and he says the problem was not with Iowa, which knows how to run caucuses. The problem was with rules imposed by the Democratic National Committee, and of course, that wonderful miracle app that they imposed as well. And now here in the state of Nevada, you've got early caucus voting. Again, an effort to try and make the caucuses more primary-like. I just fail to see the point. You've got something that works. If you don't like caucuses, then get rid of caucuses, but don't try to make them some kind of hybrid that includes all kinds of digital hocus pocus that accomplishes nothing except make nerds happy.
No, it also brings up suspicions because it was the DNC, for example, that recently changed the rules to allow Michael Bloomberg to participate in the debate. It was the DNC that altered the superdelegate rules to allow Hillary Clinton to obtain the nomination. And it is the DNC and the Democrat establishment that is utterly freaked out and worried about the downvote in the event that Bernie Sanders gets the nomination. It sure appears that Michael Bloomberg was summoned to kind of stop that momentum, and his debate performance probably worried the Democrat establishment even more.
I want to come back certainly to Bloomberg and his influence here, but suffice it to say that you're saying that Bernie isn't necessarily paranoid to think that what happened to him in 2016 is going to happen again.
Well, I mean, it's clear that he is not paranoid. They always say that it's not wrong to be paranoid when people are really after you, and the Democratic establishment tolerates Bernie Sanders, who is not a Democrat, by the way, and they tolerate he and the radical side of the Democrat Party represented by the Squad, their talk about somehow distinguishing government takeover of, free enterprise as something democratic. But it's now being said aloud, and that was probably one of the best statements that Bloomberg made, is calling out Bernie Sanders not only on the fact that he has basically been in love with an ideology that has killed 100 million people, and but secondly, that he's a hypocrite. He's a consummate hypocrite because he's a millionaire with 3 houses, and because he has lived off of these government jobs his whole life, and it's while calling out billionaires, and so it's interesting. I think the Democrats now face a Hobson's choice because either way they go, it looks like they're setting themselves up for a big loss in the upcoming election. If they allow Bernie Sanders to continue having the momentum, and even if he gets the plurality of delegates and doesn't get the requisite number, and then they go to a brokered convention and they somehow fix it so Bernie's not the nominee, it risks a splinter of the Democrat Party with the Bernie Sanders supporters either staying home, voting for the Green Party, or shudder voting for President Trump in his reelection. So I think either way they go, I think they're right to worry about Bernie Sanders in relation to the down vote, because so many of the House candidates who won, and by razor-thin margins in districts that Trump won, so many of those presented themselves as moderates. And it's going to be very difficult for them to present themselves somehow as a moderate with a party with the person on the top of the ticket being a socialist.
And some of them have already come out and said that they are not going to be automatic blank checks for the party nominee, that they either would not or would have great trouble supporting a socialist, which of course pretty much means Bernie Sanders, although I guess Elizabeth Warren could still be counted in that. So some of them have already come out and said those things. So again, now you got Nancy Pelosi in the mix here, because she would like to retain her speakership, and no majority, no speakership, no chairmanship for Jerry Nadler, no chairmanship for Adam Schiff, and all the rest. So now you got other people involved.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, and Pelosi is still endorsing Joe Biden. But I think Nancy Pelosi's made so many bad decisions. I mean, in terms of the impeachment, which backfired on the Democrats gigantically, Pelosi made one wrong decision after another. First of all, putting as the face of the impeachment the lead House member, Adam Schiff, who had zero credibility before he began the hearings and had a negative number with credibility after he completed what were hearings that began without a vote, that were held in secret, that had auditions for witnesses that were selective in their leaking, were selective in their delivery to the Senate, all of these things. And, of course, Nancy Pelosi is the one that delayed wrongfully, unconstitutionally, breaching her duty to deliver articles of impeachment after screaming that the president was a clear and present danger, there was urgency. Then she sits on those articles until right before the Iowa caucuses, and it all magnificently backfired on them, which is now the reason that they're moving to another narrative, back to Russia again.
Back to Russia again. Yes, the golden oldies. They flipped to an oldies format. And, of course, through this all, during the entire impeachment process of the hearings before the Intelligence Committee and then the Judiciary Committee, during that time, the president's approval numbers rose from 46 to 50%, which put him 1 point ahead of where Barack Obama was at the same point in his presidency. Those opposed to impeachment, those numbers rose. The president's standings in hypothetical matchups with leading Democrats rose. I mean, the whole exercise, by every index I've seen, and that's, I think, 5 polls when I stopped counting, they all indicated that the impeachment process helped the president in terms of his public support. So, again, I'm not sure just exactly what they expect from all of this, but we're going to come back and talk some more with our guest, James Herson, a New York Times best-selling author, a media analyst, law professor. Our number 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Nevada caucuses on Saturday after early caucus voting. Yes, a bizarre concept. We'll talk about that as well when we come back on The Bohannon Show in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. The third of the contests to help the Democrats pick a presidential nominee will be held on Saturday, the Nevada caucuses, and our guest is the media analyst, law professor, and New York Times best-selling author James Herson. We have a call from Nancy in St. Augustine, Florida, to join us this evening. And Nancy, good evening.
Hi, Jim. I don't know that I'm specifically addressing your guest tonight. More you, because you've said this a couple of times in the last week or so, and I would question your characterization of Bernie Sanders. A number of people, both on the left and the right, have characterized this man as a communist, and I would cite Jim Carville, solid Democrat, Chris Matthews, solid Democrat, Ben Shapiro, Lars Larson, both conservative analysts, and also very recently, maybe today, Jim Cramer, financial analyst. They all characterize Bernie Sanders as a communist. And you have fought that idea, saying that he is not a communist, but a socialist. Could you comment on that, please?
Absolutely, I certainly can. Bernie Sanders is not in favor of establishing gulags. He is not in favor of killing several million Americans in slave labor camps. He's in favor of a philosophy that could do terrible damage to our economy and in the process hurt the Constitution badly. But the notion that these two are interchangeable terms is ridiculous. There are no gulags in Sweden. And I merely note that, and I've had Sanders on this program, and in fact, my first question to him when I had him on was, aren't you really just a liberal Democrat? He said, no, I'm a proud democratic socialist, blah, blah, blah. And then I compared his voting records with Barney Frank and Ted Kennedy, and of course they were identical. And he's not been back on the show since then. There is a difference. Communism is one of the most vicious forms of government, maybe even worse at its worst in terms of, if nothing else, body count, than the Nazis were. Socialism is just a terribly stupid way to run an economy. So I do make that distinction. That does not mean that I'm even one iota more likely to vote for Bernie Sanders. It just means that I'm not prepared to make it up. And that's my take. James Herson.
Yes, well, I would say this, honeymooning in Moscow doesn't make you a communist.
No, but it does mean that you are willing to overlook some of the terrible flaws